She parked at the end of the street, not in front of my house, 2 houses down, like she was giving me the choice to pretend I hadn't seen her. I had been watching the car for 3 minutes before she got out, and I already knew, before she said a single word, that whatever she had come to say was going to cost me something. Hi, my name is Noah Garrett. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, in a small house on the east side of the city where the streets are narrow and the neighbors know when you haven't slept. I work maintenance for a property management company during the day and pick up repair jobs in the evenings. Wiring, pipes, roof patches, whatever needs doing. It keeps the bills paid. It keeps my hands busy. That's enough. It wasn't always this quiet. 5 years ago, I was a safety engineer on a major bridge project, the Harlan Crossing, a 6-lane infrastructure expansion that was supposed to be the biggest municipal contract in the county's history. I was 27, youngest safety supervisor on the job. I believed, the way young people believe things, that if you did your work carefully and told the truth about what you found, the system would protect you. I found structural cracks in 3 load-bearing piers on the eastern span. I documented everything, measurements, photographs, a full written report with a recommendation to halt work until an independent assessment could be completed. I submitted it through every channel available to me. The report disappeared. 2 weeks later, scaffolding on the same eastern span collapsed during a shift change. 3 workers were injured. The investigation that followed concluded that the safety engineer on site had failed to identify warning signs in time. That engineer was me. My certification was suspended. My name went out quietly through the contracting networks the way bad news travels, without anyone saying it directly, just a closed door here and a phone call not returned there. I couldn't get hired for anything above basic labor. Around the same time, my wife Maya was sick, autoimmune. We'd been married a little over a year. When I lost the job, we lost the insurance that came with it. I sold the car, worked nights, took every job I could find. It wasn't enough. She died 16 months after they let me go. I don't talk about that part much. I just work and come home and try not to think too far ahead. That was the life I was living when Ivy Calloway parked 2 houses down on a Tuesday evening in October and walked toward my porch. She was about 30. Dark coat, no assistant, no lawyer, no security, just a leather bag and the particular careful posture of someone who has practiced being calm. She stopped at the bottom of my steps and looked up. "My name is Ivy Calloway," she said. "My father passed 6 weeks ago. I came because of something I found after he died." I knew the name, Calloway Construction. Regional firm, 3 decades of municipal contracts, half the infrastructure in eastern Tennessee built with their equipment and their concrete. Her father's name was Richard Calloway. He had been the principal on the Harlan Crossing project. I tightened my hand on the porch railing. "What did you find?" she told me. After the funeral, the estate lawyers had discovered a secondary safe in her father's home office, behind a panel in the back wall. Inside was a file folder. My original report was in it. The photographs, the measurements, the written recommendation, every page I had submitted and been told didn't exist. Also in the folder, an independent structural assessment confirming the piers were compromised, ordered by her father and then buried, and a memo Richard Calloway had written 4 days before the scaffolding collapse, instructing the project manager to keep the schedule moving and, quote, adjust the documentation afterward if necessary. I didn't speak for a long time. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally said. "Because it's true," she said, "and because you're the one who was called a failure for finding it." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I pointed at the lowest step. "You can sit there," I said. "You're not coming inside." She sat. We talked for almost 2 hours that first evening. I didn't make any decisions. When she drove away, the street was dark, and I stood on the porch until the sound of her car was gone. For the first time in 5 years, I knew my report still existed somewhere, locked in a safe that had belonged to the man who destroyed me. The truth had been waiting all along. She came back 3 times the following week. She always arrived in the late afternoon and parked a little farther down the street. She never brought lawyers or contracts or anything that looked like an offer. She just carried the leather bag and sat on the bottom step while I stayed at the top. The distance between us felt intentional, like two people on opposite sides of something that neither of them had created. On the second visit, she brought a copy of my original report. I recognized every page, every photograph, every measurement, even a small numbering error I had made on the third page. I had forgotten the specific details, but the moment I held the paper in my hands, the morning came back completely. Sitting in the cab of the company truck before the shift started, typing the report with cold fingers, knowing even then that the project manager didn't want to read it. I held the pages for a long time without saying anything. "Did you have these verified?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Forensic document examiner. Ink, paper, digital metadata, all of it cross-referenced with city records. Everything matches." I asked why her father had kept documents that could destroy him. She said she didn't know. Maybe guilt, maybe insurance against the board. I didn't care about his reasons. What mattered was that the proof had survived. On the fourth visit, I told her everything. I started with the morning I found the cracks and worked forward through every door that had closed in front of me after the investigation, every firm that said yes and called back the next day to say they had reconsidered, every colleague who stopped returning messages, every job that evaporated when the name Harlan Crossing came up. I told her about the night I came home and found my filing drawer open, nothing else touched, just the folder where I kept my copy of the report. Then I told her about Maya. I didn't give her the hardest parts. I didn't describe the night Maya sat at the kitchen table trying to split one pill because we couldn't afford the refill. I didn't repeat the evening she apologized to me for being sick, as if her body had done something wrong on purpose. I only said that when I lost the job, we lost the insurance. That 16 months later she was gone. Ivy didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say her father hadn't meant for it to happen. She sat on the step below mine and listened until I finished. When I stopped, she said quietly, "My father read your report. He knew exactly what you had found. He still chose to keep building. I had suspected that for 5 years. Hearing it from his daughter felt different from suspecting it." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want to know what you want to happen," she said. "This is your story. I won't release anything without your answer." It was the first time she had put the decision in my hands instead of telling me what she planned to do for me. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Meridian Recovery Services, claiming I owed $11,000 in administrative costs related to the Harlan Crossing investigation. 30 days to pay, or they would place a lien on my house. I knew the debt was fabricated. I also knew it wasn't a coincidence. I called Ivy from the backyard. After I read it to her, she said immediately that no such fees had ever existed and that her attorney could have it withdrawn within the week. "No," I said. My voice came out harder than I intended. "I don't want Calloway money or Calloway lawyers protecting me from a threat that Calloway people created. If you pay that bill, every time I look at this house I'll remember it was saved by money from the same place that took everything else." She was quiet. "All right," she said. "I won't touch it unless you ask me to." She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain why her help would be different from her father's damage. She just accepted what I had said and meant it. That mattered to me more than I was ready to admit. After the letter, I started pulling back anyway. I answered only what she asked. I didn't let the conversations run long. Eventually, I told her directly that I was done. "You can lose the company and rebuild somewhere else," I said. "You have a name everyone recognizes. I have this house and whatever reputation I have left. Those aren't the same risk." She didn't promise that everything would work out. She only said, "I know the risks aren't equal for us." The honesty in that sentence bothered me more than any reassurance would have. 2 days later, I called her and said I wasn't going forward. She came and stood at the bottom of the steps and didn't argue. I said I believed she genuinely wanted to make things right, but wanting to fix something and being able to actually do it were two different things. I had already lost everything once by trusting a system that claimed it would protect people who told the truth. She nodded. she said. "I respect your decision." She walked back to her car. I watched her go and told myself that was the end of it. That night the house was so quiet I could hear the clock in the living room. I sat in front of the wooden box where I kept Maya's things, her wedding ring, a few photographs, the letters she had written when we were dating, the small spiral notebook she used to track her medication schedule, dates, dosages, how she was feeling each day, written in her careful handwriting. I opened the notebook looking for nothing in particular. Between 2 pages near the middle, I found a loose sheet, hospital letterhead on one side. On the back, a few lines in her handwriting, written during one of the long waits between appointments. "Noah still thinks he failed because he couldn't save me, but what scares me most isn't the sickness. It's watching him start to believe that telling the truth doesn't matter anymore." I read it 3 times. I sat there without moving for a long time, and then I finally understood what she had actually been trying to say to me in the hospital, in those last weeks when she was too tired to say much at all. She hadn't asked me to keep fighting for her. She had only been afraid that what happened at Harlan Crossing would turn me into someone who chose silence just to stay safe. I had spent 5 years telling myself I was protecting what little I had left. The truth was, I had let fear make every decision. If I stayed quiet now, Richard Calloway would still win, even though he was already dead. I picked up my phone and sent Ivy one message. "Don't leave town, please." 40 minutes later, her car came back down the street. She came up the walkway with a larger bag than usual. She didn't ask why I had changed my mind. She just sat on the step below mine the way she had every other evening and waited. "Show me everything," I said. "Don't hold anything back." She opened the bag and took out a thick envelope, 2 folders, and a small USB drive. The first folder contained the independent structural assessment, commissioned by her father's own engineers 14 days before the scaffolding collapse, never submitted to the city. Every finding matched what I had warned about. The 3 piers showed abnormal deterioration. The concrete mix had not met design specifications. The project should have been halted for a full review. The second folder held a chain of internal emails between her father and the company's legal director discussing how to manage the investigation, which members of the safety board could be influenced, and how to position the narrative so that the responsibility would land on the site engineer, on me. I read every page twice. Then Ivy set the USB on the step between us. She said one of the audio files had come from a recording found on the hard drive inside the safe. The forensic examiner had confirmed it had not been edited. She pressed play. Her father's voice came out of the small speaker into the quiet street. He was speaking with the project manager 4 days before the accident. The project manager mentioned my report and said he was worried I had already sent a copy to the safety board. Her father said it had been handled. He told him to keep the schedule moving and, if anything went wrong, to document the cause as equipment failure. Then he said clearly, "The safety engineer's report does not exist on official record, so no one can cite it." The recording ended. I sat without moving. For 5 years there had been a part of me that kept circling back. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe the cracks weren't as serious as I'd assessed. Maybe if I'd been more experienced, the accident wouldn't have happened. The recording removed every one of those doubts. He had read the warning. He had known I was right. He had deliberately erased me from the record. I looked at Ivy. "He didn't ignore it," I said. "He chose me to take the blame." "Yes," she said. She didn't try to explain him. She didn't offer context or history or anything that would soften what I had just heard. I asked what would happen to her if the documents became public. She said the board would probably remove her as CEO before the process finished. The legal director would use every resource the company had to contest the evidence. She would likely spend years in litigation. "Then why are you still here?" I asked. She looked at me steadily. "Because if I stay silent now that I know the truth, I'm not any different from my father in the only way that matters." I didn't answer right away, but it was the same thing I had just figured out about myself. "Give me 3 days," I said. During those 3 days, I went to work. I fixed things. Every evening I read through the documents again and played the recording once more. On the second day, I drove to the cemetery. I sat in front of Maya's headstone and told her everything, even though I knew no one was going to answer. I admitted I was scared. Not of being called a liar again. I was used to that. I was scared of hoping and then watching it be taken apart a second time. But before I left, I understood that I could not spend the rest of my life protecting this house by living inside a lie. On the morning of the third day, I called Ivy. "We're going to do it," I said, "but we're doing it the right way." I didn't want a corporate statement written by a PR team. I didn't want the story appearing only inside a legal filing nobody would read. I wanted a press conference. Every piece of evidence presented at the same time in public, so nothing could be quietly taken back. Ivy agreed. She hired an independent media attorney only to make sure we didn't accidentally violate rules that could get the evidence excluded. She promised the lawyer would not write our statements. In the days leading up to the press conference, we met often. For the first time, I saw what was behind her usual composure. One afternoon, her phone was buzzing constantly. I asked what was happening. She said the board had found out she was holding the documents and had demanded she turn everything over. The legal director had warned her that if she continued, she would be removed before the press conference could happen. "You don't have to destroy your own life to fix mine," I said. She shook her head. "I'm not doing this only for you," she said. "I'm deciding what kind of person I'm going to be after inheriting everything from my father." I started seeing her differently after that. Not because she was giving something up. I didn't want to see her that way. I saw a woman choosing to leave the safest place she had ever known because she refused to keep living on top of something wrong. There was no love between us then, but for the first time, I believed her completely. What happened between the day she first parked down the street and the day of the press conference was not dramatic. It was small. It was the way she handed me the documents, carefully, two-handed, like she understood they were more than paper to me. It was the way she never arrived before calling first, giving me the choice to say not today. It was the evening I had food on the stove and she could smell it through the screen door, and she said nothing, just waited on the step until I came back out. It was the afternoon she asked about Maya, not about the illness or the insurance or the timeline of what the job loss had done to the treatment. She asked what Maya had been like, what she laughed at, what she was doing before everything changed. I hadn't been asked that in years, I told her. Maya had been a middle school librarian. She had strong opinions about which books got shelved where, and mild but genuine contempt for laminating machines because she said they ruined the smell. She could not parallel park without narrating the whole maneuver out loud. She made very good chili and knew it. Ivy listened without filling the silences. I noticed that she did that. Let the silences stay as long as they needed to. Most people rushed to cover them. She didn't. I noticed the way she looked at the house the first time she came inside. I'd finally let her in after the 4th week. To show her a document I wanted her to read at the table where the light was better. She looked at it the way you look at a place where someone has lived carefully and alone for a long time. Not with pity, with understanding. I noticed the way she took her coffee, black, no sugar, and never mentioned it, just drank what was put in front of her. I started making it right without telling her I had noticed. She never commented on it either, she just drank it. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. The press conference was held in a downtown hotel on a Wednesday morning. No corporate banners, no Calloway branding. 12 reporters, 2 local news cameras, 3 investigative journalists by video link. I arrived early and sat near the back. I had thought about wearing the suit I'd bought for Maya's funeral. In the end, I wore a dark blue shirt and a plain jacket. I didn't want to look like someone asking for sympathy. I wanted to look like an engineer who had done his job. Ivy walked to the front without notes. She began by explaining what she had found in her father's safe. She laid out my original report, the independent assessment, the internal emails, and then played the recording. When her father's voice came through the room, everything went still. I watched the reporters stop writing. A few of them looked at each other. One immediately picked up his phone. Ivy did not call what her father had done a mistake or a miscalculation. She said it plainly. Richard Calloway had read the report. He had understood the risk. He had chosen to bury it to protect the schedule and the company's finances. Then she said my name. Noah Garrett did his job. He identified the danger, documented it thoroughly, and submitted warnings through every official channel available to him. His records were deliberately erased so that one person could be made to carry blame for the decisions of people with more power. A reporter asked if I wanted to speak. I stood and walked to the front. The walk felt longer than it was. I stood beside Ivy and looked at the cameras. I did my job, I said. I found the problem, wrote the report, and sent warnings through every channel I could use. What happened afterward was not my failure. I paused. I've been carrying a name that didn't belong to me for 5 years. I'm not here for sympathy or for revenge. I only want the record to show what actually happened. The days after the press conference moved quickly in the way consequential things do. Calloway Construction released a statement claiming the documents had been selectively presented and the recording lacked proper context. The legal director appeared on a local news program for 12 minutes repeating the phrase full context until it stopped meaning anything. Within 48 hours, 2 independent audio experts confirmed the recording was authentic. A former records employee at Calloway contacted the press and said she had been ordered to delete files related to my initial submission. Another provided emails proving the safety board had received my certified letter and marked it undeliverable. A state oversight committee announced it was reopening the Harlan Crossing investigation. 3 board members resigned. Ivy was suspended as CEO. I found out when I saw her name in the news that evening. I called her immediately. "Are you all right?" She was quiet for a moment. I knew this would happen. Knowing doesn't make it easy. Her voice was different than I had ever heard it. Not careful, not composed, just tired. My whole life was being prepared to run that company. Every decision I ever made was made inside it. Now the same people who were congratulating me 6 months ago are calling me a traitor. "You didn't betray the company," I said. "You refused to protect something that was wrong." "That's not the same thing." A small silence. Then, "You're the last person who should be comforting me." "I'm not talking to the Calloway name," I said. "I'm talking to Ivy." After that call, the last careful distance between us began to change. Not quickly. There was no moment where everything shifted. It was more like the light changing in a room. Gradual, until you look up and realize it's completely different from what it was. 6 weeks after the press conference, my certification was restored. The letter stated that the previous suspension had been based on falsified records. The fabricated debt was canceled. The lien request on my house was withdrawn. A mid-sized construction firm sent a job offer. The director's letter said they had read my original report and wanted someone with that kind of attention on their safety division. I read that sentence several times. 5 years earlier, one firm had closed every door in front of me with a phone call nobody made directly. Now one old report was opening them again. The first person I called when I signed the contract was Ivy. She was quiet for a moment when I told her. Then she said, "Maya would have been very proud of you." I didn't ask how she knew her name. Maybe I had said it. Maybe she had read it somewhere. What mattered was the way she said it. Not "you should be proud" or "this is good news." She said what she thought Maya would have felt. I had to put the phone down for a moment before I could answer. 3 months after the press conference, Ivy formally resigned from Calloway Construction. She could have waited to be removed and collected a significant settlement. She chose to leave on her own terms. In a short statement, she wrote that she could not inherit what her father had built without accepting responsibility for how he had built it. She used part of her personal savings to establish a fund for workers who had been injured or retaliated against for reporting safety problems on Calloway projects. She did not name the fund after herself or after her father. She told me over the phone that the bridge where everything had started should be remembered, not erased. After that, she started a small consulting practice focused on community construction projects, independent safety oversight, a clear reporting channel for workers. She asked if I would help design the safety procedures for the first project, a community health center in a neighborhood called Cedar Ridge, about 4 miles from my house. I said no the first time. I was afraid of what it would mean to owe her something. Ivy didn't push. She placed a standard employment contract on the table and said, "I'm not offering you a favor. I'm hiring an engineer whose work I trust. Have a lawyer look at the terms if you want." I understood then what she had finally figured out about me. I didn't need to be saved. I needed to be treated as an equal. I signed the contract. One evening in March, about a week before the Cedar Ridge opening, I was working late at the site going over the final inspection checklist. Ivy was there too, finishing something at the folding table she'd set up in the corner. Around 8, the building was quiet except for the sound of her pen and the occasional rustle of paper. I had been aware of her for most of the evening without looking at her directly, the way you become aware of a sound that's been there for a long time and have stopped noticing and then suddenly notice again. She looked up at some point and caught me not quite looking at her. She didn't say anything, just looked back down at her papers. I went back to the checklist. An hour later she set her pen down and stretched and said she needed to ask me something. Her voice had that particular tone it got when she was working up to something. Careful, exact. "When this project is finished," she said, "and the contract ends, what happens then?" I looked at her across the room. The question was simple. It wasn't really about the contract. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I've been thinking about it." She held my gaze. "So have I." That was all. Neither of us said anything more that night. We finished our work and walked out to our separate cars and drove home separately. But the question had been asked, and the fact that she had asked it directly, without pretending it was about logistics, told me something I had been needing to know. I thought about it on the drive home, about what it meant that a woman who had lost an empire for the sake of a truth had looked at me across a folding table and asked what happens next, about what it meant that I already had an answer. I just wasn't ready to say it yet, but I was getting there. Slowly. The way I had come to understand was the only way that mattered between us. The 4 months we worked together on the Cedar Ridge project changed things between us in the way that working beside someone always does. Slowly, honestly, in the small decisions. We argued. I thought she moved the schedule too fast. She said I prepared for worst-case outcomes as a reflex, which was a strength in safety work and a problem in everything else. One afternoon we spent 40 minutes on the phone disagreeing about a material supplier she wanted to switch at the last minute. But unlike every boss I had worked for before, when I explained my position fully, she listened. Not politely, actually listened. Changed her mind when the reasoning was sound, pushed back when it wasn't. She treated my judgment as something worth arguing with. One evening after we finished an inspection, we had dinner at a small restaurant near my neighborhood. We had done this a few times by then, informal, after work, nothing announced. She asked why I was still in the house on the east side when I could afford somewhere else now. I told her it was the last place Maya and I had lived together. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're not ready to leave. Or maybe you think leaving would mean leaving her behind." No one had ever said it that way before. Not as a suggestion or a correction, just as an observation, offered and then left alone. I looked at her across the table. Part of me is afraid if I change too much, the memories will start going quiet. She didn't tell me I had to move on. She didn't tell me what the healthy thing was to do. She only said, "The love you had for her isn't inside those walls." I thought about that sentence for days afterward. What I felt for Ivy by then was not something I had chosen or planned. It had arrived the way real things arrive, without announcements, already present by the time I noticed it. I didn't love her because she had fixed my record. I didn't see her as a replacement for anything. I loved that she had been willing to lose an empire rather than live comfortably on top of a lie. I loved that she never made promises she wasn't sure she could keep. I loved that she let silences last as long as they needed to. But I didn't say any of it yet. I waited until the project was finished, our contract had ended, and neither of us had any professional reason to be in the same room. There was a Saturday in November when it rained all day. I was patching a section of roof 2 streets over and came home soaked through, and Ivy was sitting on my porch steps with a bag of food from a place downtown. She hadn't called ahead, she just said she was passing through the neighborhood and had ordered too much. I had never believed that, and I didn't believe it then. But I let it be what she said it was. We ate at the kitchen table. The first time she had been past the living room, she looked around at everything with that careful attention she gave to spaces where people actually lived, not performed. The old photographs on the shelf. The tools on the counter I hadn't put away yet. The 2 coffee mugs I still kept in the cabinet even though one of them hadn't been used in years. She didn't ask about the second mug. We talked about the Cedar Ridge project, about a contractor who kept submitting incomplete documentation, and what I planned to do about it. About a change she was considering to the community room layout. Ordinary conversation, the kind you have with someone whose judgment you have learned to trust. At some point the rain got heavier against the windows and neither of us mentioned leaving. I made tea, not coffee. It was late and she had mentioned once that coffee after 7 kept her up. And she wrapped her hands around the cup the way she wrapped her hands around things she wanted to stay warm. Around 9 she said she should go. She stood up and put on her coat and I walked her to the door. She paused at the threshold, the way she sometimes paused before saying something that mattered. "Thank you for letting me in," she said. She meant the kitchen. She may have meant other things. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I may have meant other things too." She walked to her car in the rain. I stood in the doorway until she was gone. I went back inside and washed both mugs and put them away. It was a small thing, it meant something anyway. The Cedar Ridge Health Center opened on a clear morning in late spring. Small ceremony, residents, local press, the workers who had actually built it. I walked through the building one final time that morning, checking exits, load points, the alarm system. 4 times, out of habit. Ivy was standing outside the main entrance when I came out, watching children from the neighborhood explore the new playground on the side of the building. She was wearing a light jacket and her hair was down and she was looking at the building the way she sometimes looked at things she had built. Quietly, like she was still deciding whether it was right. I walked over to her. She glanced at me. "How many times?" 4. "And it's safe." She nodded, a small smile. Then it faded slightly. "So the contract is finished?" "Yes," I said. I looked at the building in front of us, the playground, the neighborhood. Then I looked at her. "Some debts can't be repaid," I said. "You can't give me back the years I lost." "No one can give me back, Maya." She didn't speak. "But you stopped making me carry your father's debt as if it were mine. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot." Ivy looked at me for a long moment. Something in her expression changed. The careful composure she had carried since the very first evening settling into something quieter and more honest. "The contract between us is over," I said. "You're not my employer and I'm not someone you need to compensate. So I want to ask you something as Noah, not as the man from the Harlan Crossing file." She waited. "Would you have dinner with me tonight? Not about the company, not about any of this. Just dinner." She looked at me the way she had looked at me sometimes during those early evenings on the porch steps. Searching, making sure of something. "Are you certain this isn't gratitude?" "I've been asking myself that for months," I said honestly. "And the answer I keep getting is that what I feel for you isn't about what you did. It's about who you are when you're not doing anything at all." Ivy was quiet. The morning moved around us. A child on the new playground was laughing at something. "Then yes," she said, "dinner." We walked back inside the building together. I had once thought that justice would feel like victory. When my name was finally returned to me, I didn't feel like I had won anything. I only felt that the ground under my feet had become level again after 5 years of standing at an angle. Some things can't be settled with money or a press conference or a certification letter. They can only be repaid with truth, and with the particular courage of people willing to lose something in order to do what is right. Ivy had done that, and I had learned, finally, that choosing to speak is not the same as choosing to lose. The rest, the dinner, the evenings, the slow and ordinary business of 2 people deciding to trust each other, came after, quietly, the way the best things do. I still live in the house on the east side of the city. I haven't left yet. Maybe I will. Maybe Ivy was right that the love isn't in the walls, But some mornings I wake up and make 2 cups of coffee without thinking about it. And that feels, for now, like enough of a beginning.